basically spent all my money on food and wine. And clients were starting to ask about, well, what are these blog things? The Drudge Report had just come around, and people were like, oh, is this a new medium? Like, should we have one as a business? Is there a value for having one as a business?
Because, when we think about, some of the peaks of all of the mountains of wine personalities, she's up there.
She's up there. People use the word goddess. And frankly, if I did negative wine reviews, I would hate my life.
The articles, the reason I ask that is because the articles are kind of, I don't even want to say all over the place, but
they are all over the place. You don't have to pull punches. Minnie Bell's Soul Movement, which I believe to be the best southern fried chicken in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's the average age at which vines are ripped out in most commercial vineyards. So if it's made it past 35, it's kind of a survivor. Since then, we've added enough. We're now at 6,600 vineyards in 42 different countries around the world.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Alder, welcome to the podcast. Happy to have you here. You and I met at Hella Shannon briefly. You were moderating for Tegan and for Bernard from Scion of Sinai and Sandlands, respectively. And it was a really cool conversation to be involved in. And when they announced you as moderator, I've never been to something like that. So I was really interested to see kind of what that position entails and how that evolves. And it was really great to watch you kind of keep them on track, because they're both quite passionate and really into talking about the things that you're bringing up. So I applaud you for keeping the direction in the interview or the moderation.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'm excited to have you here, and I've read some stuff online, but I'd love if you could kind of walk us through your background, tell us how you got to wine, what was the spark that really kind of got you deciding that you wanted to do it full time, and how it kind of manifested in your life.
Sure. Well, the important thing to note, first of all, is that wine is not full time for me. Mm-hmm. So I have and have always had a day job, which is how I pay the bills, because wine writing generally doesn't. So I've had a long career since I graduated college in sort of web design, digital marketing, product design, user experience, things like that. And so today I make my living as a sort of freelance consultant and board advisor and design leader for hire doing that. And I balance the wine stuff maybe in the time that most people spend watching TV. I spend writing about wine.
That's awesome.
I got the wine bug in college. I did a couple semesters abroad in England, and I don't really like beer, it turns out. So I was legal to drink over there, and I had to drink something, and cider was pretty good, but wine was better. And I kind of started like everybody starts, buying off the bottom shelf by label, what looks interesting. And the food was also pretty lousy at the time in terms of what they were serving in the university cafeterias there in the colleges. And so I started cooking for myself, which meant, spaghetti sauce out of a jar and dried spaghetti. But I thought, I'm a young intellectual in Europe. I should be drinking wine with my dinner. So I'd go out and buy a bottle of wine, bring it home. Some of it was interesting, some of it I liked, some of it I didn't like, but I kind of just got the bug. And then I came back, and when I graduated college, I helped a guy start a web design agency. And I didn't have any pets, I didn't have a girlfriend. I basically spent all my money on food and wine, taught myself to cook, and started, buying wine at the grocery store, and then up to the top shelf of the grocery store, and then realizing, I can get better wine at the fine wine stores, graduating to that. And because I have a slightly, my wife would say obsessive compulsive or type A personality, I started taking notes on what I ate and drank. It was a way for me to learn and to remember things. And so I just filled up notebook after notebook after notebook about, things that I ate and drank. And I started going to Napa and, exploring. So largely autodidact in the world of wine, just tasted a lot, really interested in it, read some books. And then in 2004, I was doing digital marketing as a freelancer, but shortly thereafter would start my own marketing agency. And clients were starting to ask about, well, what are these blog things? The Drudge Report had just come around, and people were like, oh, is this a new medium? Like, should we have one as a business? Is there a value for having one as a business? And I didn't really know much about blogs. And so I thought, okay, I should figure this out. And the easiest way for me to do that was to just start one. And so I thought, okay, if I was going to start a blog, what would it be about? And look over at the shelf at all those different notebooks full of wine. I thought, oh, I'll start a wine blog. So turns out I was kind of like one of the first ones on the internet. And I figured out what blogs were all about. But in the process, I also found a really kind of fulfilling creative outlet. And so I started writing, and after a couple of weeks, I was writing several times a week, and just really enjoying the process. It was also a way of me learning along the way, right? And so one thing led to another, and one day, like, the first box of wine showed up that somebody wanted to send me, and I thought, wow, this is great. And I basically haven't stopped doing that for 20 years.
That's awesome. And there was a time, and is still a time, as I just found out apologetically, that you started working with Jancis. I mean, when did that kind of come into the fold, and how did that initial interaction go? Because I mean, when we think about some of the peaks of all of the mountains of wine personalities, I mean, she's up there.
She's up there. People use the word goddess, maybe loosely. So I'd been writing for about 7 years at that point, and had won a ton of awards and was kind of like pretty well known in the wine blogosphere, which means not really well known at all, but I had crossed Jancis's radar, and we ended up both being speakers at the IPNC, the International Pinot Noir Celebration that just stopped running in McMinnville, but had been going for years in Oregon. And we ended up sitting together at lunch one day, and she said, "Hey, I really like your stuff." I said, "Oh, whoa, great, thank you, Jancis." And she said, "I would love to find some way to work together. Everything from maybe me even buying your site to, I don't know what, but let's talk." And I was like, "Whoa, okay." So we had some conversations, and turns out what made the most sense was for me to just start writing for her regularly. And so we started a column called Alder on America, which was at first focused on kind of reporting on the wine scene in the United States, more kind of editorial and journalistic, with news, different things that happened. And then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, Tara Thomas, who came on from Wine and Spirits to be the managing editor, asked if I wouldn't consider switching it to be a more tasting focused column. And so since that time, I've been doing wine criticism, basically, focused on American wine, dominantly California, but from all over.
It's a wild evolution, in a way. I feel like I can relate to it in the sense of, I was working in restaurants, but I wanted to get into wine, and I started buying $10 bottles of wine was like a splurge, and then it was, you work your way up and you get into the $30 category, $40 category, and then you realize you'd be better off going to like a wine centric place versus just kind of the Walmart that I was shopping at. But then, I mean, just kind of the concept of writing until right is something that I think is really fascinating. In the very beginning iteration of the podcast relaunch, season 2, we started it with a website, and we were doing like wine reviews, and it was 5 wines a month. So $5 subscription. It's 5 wines a month that were rated. It was a bio about the winery, bio about the wine, and then it was a rating of 1 to 5 on 3 scales: my preference, typicity, and affordability. And even just reviewing 5 wines was a lot for me. So I applaud you for the amount of content you put out, which is incredible, especially considering that this is not technically full time. One of the things that I think is really fascinating about like the early blog life and kind of the way that you got started and probably where you are now is, do you find I read through some of the reviews. It's not like you're dogging on particular brands, but do you find a heavy sense of responsibility when it comes to writing some of these things?
Yeah, well, I have a responsibility first and foremost to kind of a core set of journalistic ethics, if you will, that I have, which is that I taste everything that anybody ever sends me. And I write about what I think is good. But I'm very diligent about, I do taste everything that gets sent to me. like I don't, and if people send me 2 bottles, like that second bottle doesn't disappear into my cellar,
Right.
like it gets given away to charity or the neighbors or what have you. So I'm quite, I have that sense of responsibility, and that extends to even sort of trying to maximize the value that a producer could get from sending me a bottle of wine. So one of the things that I do is I taste samples with Coravin, and then I, once every 4 or 5 months, take 150 Coravin bottles and put them out on my porch, and I invite all the people that I know in the neighborhood to come and just basically have a shopping spree on my porch. Because, opening a bottle of wine, putting 3 ounces in my glass, tasting it, and then pouring the rest down the drain is just a freaking waste, right? Yeah. So, with Coravin and with this little stupid thing that I do on my porch, more people get access to the wines. Maybe those people fall in love with the wine. They go out and buy more. And so the incredible expense that a producer has made to ship me that bottle of wine, to give me that bottle of wine for free, which costs them money, I feel a real responsibility to sort of help them maximize that to the best possible. But that doesn't mean reviewing everything, or just because it's a famous name saying nice things about it. It doesn't matter how much the wine costs. If it sucks, I'm going to not review it.
Right.
Or if it's, okay, but not great, like a rosé that I got the other day that was $150 a bottle. And
I read that.
You read that review. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, everybody gets to decide how much is too much. Yeah. But, for me, this wine doesn't have enough acid and I'd like it to be a little brighter. And, the subtext there is, I'm not going to tell you that there's no way I would pay $150 for that rosé, because, everybody, if you're incredibly wealthy, maybe you want it because it's only a limited thing. And, right. Yeah. So, but that doesn't impress me.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I think too, like the way that you worded it was really well worded. Obviously I can't do that. But I like that you reviewed that wine, and even though, again, you didn't slam the wine, you kind of put it in the way that you put it. And I thought that that's really good too, because a lot of people that don't know much about wine, or even that do know something about wine, will go to your website and they'll go like, oh, this $150 rosé, I wonder if it's worth it, right? And for some people, $150 is a lot of money. And that's, we're talking about retail. God forbid you go to the restaurant, there's a $300 bottle of rosé, $400 bottle of rosé, depending on, the margins of the restaurant. And in a way, I like the way that you reviewed it, because it was very, I don't know, two sides of the same coin. It's like, for some people, 100 cases or 100 bottles or whatever it was is the point. And for some people, the quality, not even the quality, but maybe the typicity of what we could argue a rosé is kind of more the point. So, and even to that, one of the things that I thought was funny is I went to your wines to not buy category on your website.
There aren't many entries there, but occasionally there's a point to be made.
Sure. And I went on and I was just like, oh, I wonder what he's slamming, and it was like a post from 2004 and then from 2007.
Yeah. No, so I haven't done that since.
You're not using your recognition to slam anything. You're using it to uplift things, which I think is beautiful.
And frankly, I mean, I get paid so little for the incredible amount of time and effort that I put in. Yeah. Unless there's a real point to be made, or it's absolutely delightful for me to do something, there's very little return on being negative. Also, I think most people want to know what to buy more than they want to know what not to buy out there in the world. And frankly, if I did negative wine reviews, I would hate my life, because there's a lot of wine that I taste that I do not review. And if I had a commitment to writing negative reviews, I'd be doing a lot more of that than the positive reviews. Also, I realized, wine is, I'm tasting one bottle, right? At this point, I'm familiar with most of the flaws and would be able to say, oh, this bottle is actually probably light struck, and I might not review it, or I might, open up the spare bottle if somebody sent me a spare bottle. But even if it's a perfectly sound wine that I don't like, it's one wine in one vintage, right? And the negative review that I'm going to write, which is going to be publicly available on the internet forever, searchable, can do damage to our reputation that might not deserve it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so when you combine that, right, the lasting potential damage of a negative review of a single wine in a single vintage when maybe there was a problem, or maybe the winemaker was not so good and they replaced him or her the next year, plus the fact that people don't want to know what not to drink, they want to know what to drink, just means that doing negative reviews is really not really worth it, right? The only time that I ever give very low scores for wines is when I'm doing some sort of comprehensive tasting in some way, right? So when I finally get around to writing up that Hella Shannon event, right, I went through and I tasted, 90 wines, something like that. I'm going to review all of them so that people can understand, here's the 90 wines that were tasted, and in the spectrum of the Shannons that were available at this event, these were good, these were bad, right? When I go up to Napa, and the Napa Valley Vintners puts together a flight of 100 2001 Napa Cabernets, I taste them all and I review them all because I'm trying to give people a picture of the spectrum of what's out there. And those occasions are an opportunity for me to say, well, look, these wines that I love, they have less overt oak influence. They're a little bit more balanced in the way that they're made. And these ones that I don't love, like, they're the opposite, right? They tend to be big and ripe and extracted, not enough acidity, more oak, right? Whatever, right? So there's a lesson to be taught there, if you will, or at least a story to be told that I think is interesting in providing that spectrum of reviews. But really, that's the only time that I negatively score or negatively review wines.
Yeah.
So
I think it's an honorable thing. I mean, it's again, there's this thing circulating in San Francisco right now. This influencer went in and
I read that story.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that comes to mind is that, like, the ability of somebody on an influencer or micro influencer level to dictate the well-being of someone's business is kind of brings us into this really weird kind of thing. Whether right or wrong is not my place to decide, really, but that's one of the things I was thinking about coming into this conversation is the responsibility that kind of comes along with that. So.
Well, I don't have 150,000 followers on TikTok, right? Just to be clear, not yet. Not yet. I'm not going to be doing the TikTok thing. I ain't got time for that. I only have tens of thousands of followers on Instagram, so I'm far from kind of an influencer type, and that's not the way I operate. Yeah, it's pretty amazing the power that's having in the world. I think back, not just this specific incident you were talking about where the chef was fired recently, but that article that came out about the French Laundry, and that strange experience that Mackenzie had at the French Laundry and sort of the furor over that. I had arguments for weeks on Facebook about that article.
I'm sure. One of the things that I really was reading in the articles that spoke to me was the 2001 vintage in Napa Valley, and your kind of overview of the 2001 vintage. And I mean, obviously we can sit and talk about why it was such a great vintage, but were there particular wines out of the 2021 lineup that immediately come to mind that you think of as kind of best of class for what you tasted?
Well, they're going to kind of read like Alder's favorite, list.
Fine. Yeah.
Corazin, of course, I adore Kathy's wines. Spotswood was another one in there. I recently had a chance to revisit the 21 vintage from Futo, a small estate tucked up underneath and very close to Harlan. Those wines are really extraordinary, and I think they debuted a new wine in 21 that I think is like the best thing I've ever tasted from them. What else popped out of that list? See, the thing about being a writer is that there's just always so much content bouncing around that like you get it down on the page and then it's like out of your brain forever. I'm constantly having
a cleansing activity.
I'm constantly having to go back to my own site and search it and be like, oh, did I taste this wine or not? I don't remember. What did I think about it?
Yeah. No, it's funny. I have an app for beer that's called Untapped, and I was always thinking the same thing. I know that there's Vivino, but like. Back in the day, there used to be this app. It was called like Uncorked, and I think it was maybe the Untapped guys' version of wine, and that's why it didn't succeed because they were beer guys doing a wine thing. But I use Untapped as the same way to rate a beer on whether or not I like it. And then when I go to a beer bar and I go, I think I've had that before, I can look it up and go, I think I like that. And then I look and I give it like a 2.5 out of 5, and I go, yeah, I'm not going to be ordering that,
Good.
So I mean, even in my small scope of knowledge, I can't imagine the amount of writing and reviews and wines that you're tasting. So yeah, no pressure. I think Corzine and Spotswood are kind of stalwarts and so important for us to recognize. And then Futo is my new one that I'll go home and do a little bit of homework on, because I don't think I've had or seen their wines before.
It's very small production, and unlike some of the other kind of more culty wines out there, they really don't. They're not very showy. They don't have a lot of like. I don't know. They don't do like social media stuff. They don't do a lot of marketing. They're not quite as visible as the Harlans of the world or the, Colgans or things like that. They're less showy, and the wines I think are just exceptional.
Yeah. How do you find an inspiration, or how do you organize your inspirations? Maybe if you have an abundance of them, of what to write. I mean, scrolling the site, I mean, obviously you have your Vinography Unboxed, which comes out as a weekly review of wines, and I like your rating system between 9 and 9.5, or between here
because
and there.
What the hell is the difference between a 92 and a 93 anyway?
And aside from that, there's an article on the Vigno and the Almal, the Pais and the Carignan historic vineyard organization, I guess, let's say. Where does it come from, and how do you kind of stack those things?
So I have some regular features, as you noted, that I try and do weekly, right? I try and do a news roundup on Mondays. I published mine today, so a little behind this week. A photo, a picture for people's viewing pleasure on Friday, and then usually reviews of wine samples that have been sent to me on Saturday.
Got it.
So those are kind of, I try and do those every week. I'm not always successful, but try and do those every week. And then less frequently, I'm writing in a couple different categories. So sometimes I'll come across like a story or an idea out there in the world, a piece of news or whatever, and I have an opinion about it, and I'll write about it. So that's just kind of a spur of the moment. I go on several press trips, press junkets a year, and there's always kind of like a backlog of wines tasted there that I've reviewed, producers that I visit that I'll profile, things like that. I'll go to large tastings like the Helle tasting that we met at, and sometimes I'll write up my scores and thoughts from those tastings. And then there are just kind of like stories that I want to track down, or stories that are kind of show up in my life that I want to investigate more fully. So I was having lunch with a guy named Derek Knapp, who's a Canadian guy who makes wine in Chile. He's one of the founders of that Vigno organization. And he was like, hey, you covered us like when we were just getting started. It's now been 10 years. What do you think about us sending you a bunch of wines so you can sort of like see where we're at a decade later? And I was like, that's a great idea. Yeah. Let's do that. And he said, oh, and by the way, did you know that there's now this organization for Pais that's very similar that some of us have started? I was like, no way, cool, send me those too. Yeah. And so that became, a couple pieces on the website recently. So things like that kind of come up that I run across, or, I'll hear about, a particular producer someplace, or, I'll just be out drinking with friends and I'll be like, whoa, what is up with this? This is awesome. I got to find out more about this. Yeah. And that'll turn into a producer review, or some, trip down the rabbit hole about, dry Samarodny from Hungary. It was like, okay, whoa, this is a dry botrytized wine that's all floor, aged. What's up with that? So world's best cheese wine, by the way.
Is it?
Oh, yeah.
Which one is that? I'm going to write it down.
Dry Samarodny, Szamorodni.
I'll get you to spell it for me later. I'll get you to spell it for me later.
Yeah. Anyway,
I can't.
It's basically what would have become a Tokai Atsu wine, but it's aged under floor, and so all the sugar goes out, and it becomes nutty like sherry, and it's just freaking great.
Okay, I'm gonna check that out. That's awesome. The best cheese wine. The articles. The reason I ask that is because the articles are kind of, I don't even want to say all over the place, but
they are all over the place. You don't have to pull punches.
They're they're very expansive, and I think that's one of the things that I like too. Is that while it would be very easy for you to maybe just sit and focus on our Northern California
Sure.
backyard, you're not limiting yourself to that, which I think is really great because there's so much to be discovered. I mean, I would have never known that there was an Old Vine Association in for Pais until I read your article today. So.
Yeah. So that comes back to my personal philosophy about wine, which is that like life is too short to drink the same stuff over and over again. One of the most amazing aspects of wine is its incredible diversity, right? For 8,000 years, human beings have been cultivating and building a relationship with this grape, in hundreds of countries around the world. Maybe not hundreds, but many, many countries around the world. And what's evolved, of all these regional specializations and people, choosing to grow grapes that, first of all, they could grow there, but also that went with the kind of food there. And there's just so much culture built into that diversity, right? The fact that there are thousands and thousands of different grape varieties, noble grape varieties making wine is fascinating. I mean, and then all the different flavors that those different varieties produce in the places that they're grown is what makes wine so interesting, compelling, magical to me. And so I celebrate that by drinking as widely as possible. And I think my interests are therefore diverse and my writing is therefore diverse, but I also believe that's a virtue to be cultivated in any wine lover. And so in addition to literally saying that in essays that I've written over the years, I try to encourage that by what I post on Instagram, what I write about on my blog, what I personally consume.
The giveaway for the neighbors.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Right. I mean, neighbors come over and they're like, what is this bottle? I don't think I can even read the letters on it. And I'm like, oh, that's an Armenian wine that I brought back from Armenia, or whatever. Like, try it out. Yeah. It's an incredible grape, blah, blah, blah. And that's curiosity is the thing in wine.
I think that's, I don't know. I like that. I mean, again, there's so many times that I've gone to a page or, again, as somebody the age that I am, a lot of what I do is Instagram, right? And a lot of what I do is like follow other wine reviewers or wine influencers or whatever. And there's very often or quite often they're very pigeonholed into what they're interested in or, maybe the reason that it feels that way is because it's what their interest is at that moment. And they're releasing so much content that it feels maybe pigeonholed versus if I step back and maybe analyzed it over a 6 month, maybe there would be a little more arc than what I'm seeing. But yeah, I was just scrolling even today before I went to get my daughter. Thank you for your patience getting set up. I know it was a little chaotic.
No problem.
But I was just like, I couldn't get over the amount of topics that you were covering. I thought it was great. So,
thank you.
One of the things that I saw when I was scrolling the online, and maybe this kind of goes back to our conversation earlier about the influencer in question, was restaurant reviews, but I wasn't able to locate them. Were you doing them? Are you still doing them?
You should be able to find them on the site. Okay. You can literally see every blog post I've ever written on the website. Yeah. I did those before I had a kid.
Oh, okay. Got it.
When I was eating out an awful lot more. Right. And, so I had fun doing those. I really enjoy writing restaurant reviews. And I was doing that in San Francisco, and I tried to at the time, and this was probably, when would this be? This would be 2007 or 2008. I tried to comprehensively cover all the wine bars in San Francisco, which, if you can believe it, you could count on the fingers of both hands.
Scary.
And sometimes, for a while on one hand. And then, I had a kid, career got busy, and so spending the time to go to restaurants, once or twice and eat a bunch of things, and it became more effort than I could really manage. There was a lot more wine stuff, and the samples just kept piling up, and so it was a matter of cutting down my focus a little bit, but yeah, they're still up there, but not particularly relevant unless the restaurant happens to still be around.
That's okay. I'll check it out. Let's give a shout out to the place that you're going tonight. I'm going to write it down so this time I actually remember it. But
Yes, Minnie Bell's Soul Movement, which I believe to be the best Southern fried chicken in the San Francisco Bay Area. It used to be in Emeryville, and so because I live in Oakland, we went there all the time as a family. Now we're very sad, but the woman who runs it finally moved to Fillmore, which I think is where she grew up, and is really excited to sort of support that neighborhood and be in that neighborhood. So I'm dragging a few friends out, and I got a bunch of champagne in a cooler in the trunk of my car, and we're gonna go eat fried chicken and drink champagne.
That's awesome. That's the dream. Yeah, I don't know that we do enough of that in our industry. We should be doing it more than we are, but that's okay.
Yeah.
It's for special moments like this. The English wine scene, I was kind of curious. You mentioned that you were drinking over there. You were drinking out of in grocery stores, started at the bottom shelf. I mean, was it a lot of what we saw back then in regards to, what was on grocery store shelves? Was it the big brands, or were you getting more European wines, I'm assuming?
So this was 1994, and like I don't know that I even really experienced the British wine scene at all. Like I was a student at the time. I didn't go out to restaurants and like check out what was on the list then or anything like that, right? I mean, this was like spaghetti sauce out of a jar and a Chianti and a Chianti and a Fiaschi, right? Or a bottle of Mateus Rosé, right? So I think, I was going to Odd Bins, which is, kind of the chain, liquor store or wine store throughout England. And I was way too intimidated to talk to anybody. So, heaven forbid I actually ask somebody for advice about what to drink. So I would just go in and scan the shelves and say, oh, well, that's kind of an interesting looking bottle shape, or whatever. And, check out the price tag. Okay, I can afford that. It's $12 or whatever, and take it home. So mostly, I think it was, it was some Italian wines. It was some Portuguese wines. Fell in love with Mateus Rosé. Goes great with everything. And then you can use it as a candle holder later, right? What else? Like some Sancerre. Simple whites. I don't think I ever did Riesling while I was there, but I at that point I was more focused on red than white, but just exploring a bit. And if I was studying at Oxford at the time, and in retrospect, I realized I missed a huge opportunity because the Oxford Wine Society is like, I could have been drinking First Growths, right? I could have had that formative experience.
You could have never afforded,
right? I mean, I could have been drinking Grand Cru Burgundies as a budding wine lover, and I missed that. Instead, I joined the Mountaineering Club, and so I went all over England, Scotland, and Wales rock climbing. But so it woulda, coulda, shoulda. But so that was mostly just I don't know, the spark of inspiration, but not anything serious. And really, California became the thing when I came back. I was like, 94 vintage, very good in California. I'm going to try and buy some and see how those compare to other vintages. And oh, wow, interesting, that sort of thing.
That's awesome. And can you maybe shed a little bit of light on the Jancis Robinson point system? Because I think for a lot of people here, it's a little confusing. I mean, I see a lot of 16.5s to 17.5s, but I never really usually see anything beyond that.
So I've rated wines 18, 19 on Jancis' site for that, and I occasionally get a little raised eyebrow from Jancis. Is it really that good? But to her credit, she's never asked me to change a score ever. Sure. Never has. But she's a bit of a strict grader. Sure. And there are a lot of people who contribute reviews to the site, and everybody's kind of different in terms of the way they go. I think, people don't tend to review wines that drop below 15. Right. Again, unless there's kind of a point, you're doing a big roundup and people mention, problematic wines. But 16.5 is pretty good, and 17.5 is really good, and then everything above that is fantastic. But the 20-point scoring system is tricky. I mean, I have to say that's, I always have to do this very careful. I always score wines in my rating system, which, as you noted, is kind of the approximate 10-point scale, right? Somewhere between 9 and 9.5. And then I have to carefully convert them to the 20-point scoring
Yeah,
system
yeah.
and using kind of this algorithm that I've developed. But it's always tricky for me for sure. But luckily, Jancis cares an awful lot more about what's written about the wine and the story that comes before it than the actual scores.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things where, like, even I think, for many people the 20-point scoring system is confusing, but many people don't understand the 90-point score or the 100-point scoring system either. You're like, yeah, 90 and above, that's great. And you're like, yeah, but basically 80 and below doesn't exist.
Right.
Right? So you're basically on a 20-point system anyways.
Right.
And then one of the other things that we were talking about before that I'd love for you to shed a little bit more light on is kind of the work you do with Glancy and kind of and those things. I saw an auction lot for some Kongsgaard wines, and you were doing a bunch of different things like that. What is that, and how do people get involved in it? And
Yeah. So it's called the Glancy Wine Education Foundation. It was inspired and conceived of by David Glancy, the master sommelier who runs the San Francisco Wine School. And in 2020, in the early days of the pandemic, after all the waiters and sommeliers had gotten laid off from their jobs and all the restaurants had shut down, he came to me and said, "Hey, Alder, all these people lost their jobs, but they want to do something with their time. They want to use this time to do self-improvement and to continue studying and learning, which is a great thing, but they can't afford to pay for classes. So we think it would be a great idea to start a foundation that could raise some money and give scholarships to people who could, to work on their wine education." I said, it's a great idea. This is a really brutal time. And of course it was also the summer of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd. And I said, and what would be even better is if we could do that and focus on diversity and really aim at the underserved populations in the world, BIPOC and women who have historically had a harder time, getting ahead in the world of wine. And he said, "Great, whatever you want to do, it's your thing. We just know that the world needs this." And so I and a couple other people started this foundation, raised a bunch of money, and for 5 years we've been giving away scholarships to people to take wine classes, mostly focused on people who are in the hospitality industry or trying to break into it. Some people who work, kind of in winery tasting rooms and things like that. And for the first few years, it was we were giving scholarships to the San Francisco Wine School only. And as of February this year, we've now got a relationship with the American Wine School, which is in a number of states in the Midwest, and the International Wine Center in New York. And so we cover the whole country and give scholarships to, dozens and dozens of people a month. We've given away several $100,000 over the course of the foundation, and it's going gangbusters. We're really happy with the work we're doing, and it's really, I won't say it's making a difference in the world of diversity. I know that we are, because we're giving away more money to more women than men, to more people of color than white folks. And so we're helping in that little way. But we also have these incredible individual stories of people, a young lady who was working in art galleries as an art appraiser and thought she wanted to transition into the world of wine, and, wrote a really compelling argument for why she should get a scholarship to a class. And we gave her one, and then we gave her another, and we gave her another. And now she's a sommelier at a Michelin-starred restaurant. Wow, that's awesome. So we've got, people who've worked their way up from servers to wine directors that way. People who feel like they've gotten promotions because of the classes they've been able to take with our scholarships. So it's pretty rewarding to do, for sure.
That's amazing. How would somebody contribute to something like that?
So first of all, spread the word, right? It's the most important thing, that people know that they can get these scholarships, and they can apply 24/7, 365 at GlancyWineEducationFoundation.org. That's Glancy, Glancy, wineeducationfoundation.org. And so you can apply year-round. It's a sort of lengthy application, because if we're going to give you $1,000 to take a wine class, we got to know some things, and you got to put a little investment into getting the money. And then we're looking for companies that are willing to continue to support the hospitality industry, and sort of diversity and earning power within the industry. there's a lot of companies are ditching their DEI programs these days, and we're really happy to be doubling down, well, tripling down in the case of now 3 major wine schools that we're working with in this space. So if individual donors, organizations are interested in supporting that mission and supporting really the people who serve us in restaurants and bars every day, then they should reach out and ask if they can give us some money, and we'd be happy to take it.
That's awesome. I love that. That's great. And then one of the other points that I think is also really fascinating and that you brought up earlier is the Old Vine Register.
Yeah.
So is this the same thing that Teagan and Morgan Twain Peterson are doing?
No,
Okay.
they are a partner
Got it.
of ours. They run the Historical Vineyard Society of California. And they catalog and also certify vineyards over 50 years old in California. It's an awesome effort, super inspiring. Teagan's like, I don't know, he's amazing. It's hard. He's a hard to describe guy. So every one of their vineyards is cataloged in our registry, but our registry is a global registry of all old vine vineyards in the world. And our definition of old is 35 years and older, because that's a definition that's pretty common amongst lots of organizations around the world, and so we're kind of standardized there. But the way that came about was that's the average age at which vines are ripped out in most commercial vineyards. So if it's made it past 35, it's kind of a survivor, right? Is that really an old vineyard? It's more mature than old, really. Especially when we've got vineyards that are 200, 250 years old out there. But the idea is that these old vineyards are valuable. They're valuable to the wine industry. They're valuable to culture. They're valuable to science, because they represent manifestations of culture, right? So somebody, somewhere, 150 years ago, decided to plant that kind of grape in that place, and they did that for a reason, right? And that's a manifestation of what was going on there at the time, what individuals' efforts were like, but also what was going on in that society and that culture. That's a survivor, right? That organism has survived 150 years of changing climate, changing, tastes and things like that. And in many cases, represents genetic information and diversity that most doesn't exist anywhere. Right, the modern clones that we have that dominate the plantings in the last 50 years didn't exist 150 years ago, and so there's plant material there, genetic material that could be very useful in this time of climate chaos, or is simply a grape that has gone out of commercial production but has real potential now in a changed climate or in a changed world of taste. And so they're very valuable that way. The problem is that old vines don't yield as much, which is why they get ripped out at 35 years. And they're not always valued. And so you can't value something that you don't know about. And so the idea with the registry, which was started by Jancis Robinson 13 or 14 years ago, when it was just a spreadsheet that she started keeping with one of her contributors on the site, is that let's catalog these things and let's know where they are, and let's gather as much information as we can about them, because that information, that data, becomes a resource for the wine industry as a whole. And so that's where it was for 10, 12 years. They just kept building this spreadsheet, 1,800 lines long, and at a certain point, Jancis was like, we can't just keep sending people PDFs of this spreadsheet. It's not useful. It really should be a website, And so she put out a call for people to help, anybody who wanted to turn it into a website. And I said, Jancis, you remember that I do have a day job, and that's what I do for a living. And she was like, well, yeah, but you don't want to do this for free. And I said, well, I'll do my part for free. We can't expect people who actually build the website to do it for free. But I tell you what, I'll figure out how to do it. I'll do all the requirements gathering. I'll design it. And if we can raise some money to pay the people to build it, I'll manage that process. And she said, great, do it. And so that's what we did. Raised a bunch of money. Jackson Family Wines gave us a bunch of money. Hired some wine-loving software developers in South Africa that I knew. And we built it 2 years ago. And so at the time we launched, it had about 2,300 vineyards in it, from about 29 countries. Since then, we've added enough. We're now at 6,600 vineyards in 42 different countries around the world. And it's starting to become a real interesting resource, right?
Yeah.
It's not fully representative of the world of old vines yet, so you can't go on and be like, where are the most old vines in the world?
Sure.
Well, we have more from France than anywhere else, but that doesn't mean there are more in there than anywhere else. It's just what we got in terms of data. But it's a really interesting thing. It's something I do on a volunteer basis, on a daily basis. People are constantly, it's set up to be like Wikipedia. So anybody can submit data. It's fully crowdsourced. And so, submissions come in every day, every couple days, and I look at them and make sure they're right and ask them questions if the data is weird, and then put it in the database and kind of maintain the site. And I work with the developers to add new features and functions over time. But it's a fun little hobby for me. Yeah. Not that I need more hobbies, but I think increasingly becoming a very interesting resource for the world of wine.
Absolutely. I mean, I think now I have much more perspective over why you were the moderator for Bernard and for Tegan, right? I mean, I knew obviously that you're great with words and you're important in this space, but also your connection to kind of these old vine conversations is important with Bernard and his family and the representation of South Africa, as well as Tegan and his relationship with the historical Old Vine Registry.
And also, I really love Shannon.
Yeah.
Let's just be clear. I really love Shannon.
Yeah. So all the 90 wines that you tasted, none of them will be bad. They'll all be great. No, that's amazing. I think that there's a lot of appreciation that will happen from all of the work that you're putting in now. I mean, obviously it is happening, but this is going to be so important as we move forward, and as the climate continues to change and so many things continue to change. There's not going to be a lot for us to look back on, because as you mentioned earlier, there's not a lot of genetic information out there, and these old vines, you hit the nail on the head, are survivors, and they're survivors of climate change, they're survivors of political change, they're survivors of market change. And really, it's only through the documentation of these things that we'll have anything to look back on.
And one of the important parts about the registry that I failed to mention is that we're trying to, in a very small way, close the commercial loop. So when you look up a vineyard on the registry and you go to that page, on that page there is a button that says buy wines from this vineyard.
Awesome.
And we are linking to Wine Searcher, and as best as possible trying to get people to actual wines that come from that vineyard so that they can buy that, and some of that money will trickle its way back to the farmer, which is what really needs to happen in order for these vines to stay in the ground. Right?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, there's so much. I think it's the only time I've used 2 pages in an interview.
That's just because I talk too much.
It's because there's so much stuff that I want to come back and reference. I mean, there's a lot to unpack, and it's just fascinating. There's so much information, and I would keep you here as long as I could. The other part of the show that have you watched any of the episodes?
I must admit, I've only watched the beginning of a couple
That's
to
fine.
make sure I understood the format.
Yeah.
But
the one thing that we do on the podcast that I didn't talk about and beforehand is we enjoy a bottle of wine blind. Not a whole bottle, obviously. Well, in some cases, a whole bottle. And really, the whole purpose behind that is to remember that drinking a bottle of wine can often be conduit to conversation and connection, and it doesn't always have to be talking about the wine.
Sure.
Too often with my friends, y'all go and hang out with them, and we go super deep on wine, and I get home and my wife is like, "Oh, how are they?" And I go, "Yeah, I have no idea, honestly. We just talked about Chenin Blanc, or we talked about whatever we were interested in." So, the simple question is, do you enjoy this wine?
I do. I do enjoy this wine. This wine hits on things that I like about wine.
Yeah.
It's bright. It's juicy. It's got acid. It's vibrant. It's fun.
Yeah, good. And then we do a little reveal, and this is more just kind of just to give a little nod to people. But I don't know. You've probably had wines from 100 Sons, and if you hadn't, I have
not had wine from 100 Sons.
That's exactly what I wanted to hear. So I wanted to take a chance to potentially introduce you to something that you hadn't had before. And 100 Sons is Grant, the husband of the husband and wife team, Grant and Renee, has been on the podcast before, and they're doing incredible things out of Yola Amity and Willamette Valley, and their wines are really, really cool, and unfortunately under the radar for now, and they're gaining in traction, and I really like what they're doing. But he used
I like
to work,
the label.
Yeah.
It looks like Magnetiles, that toy that my kid used to love playing with.
Grant does all the labels himself,
Huh.
which is awesome. And he used to work for oh God, of course I'm gonna forget the name on a podcast.
Of course you will, right?
He-
You've talked about it endlessly, and
I
now in
know.
the moment.
The guy that owns Sequitur now and used to own Beaufrere. Wetzel? Not Wetzel.
Well, Robert Parker owned Beaufrere.
Right, but his brother-in-law. The one
Oh,
that's
I
doing
don't know
the
his
winemaking.
brother-in-law's name.
Yeah. Anyways, I'll put it in the show notes or something. But
All right.
yeah. So I guess, given that this isn't necessarily your full-time thing, what was the spark, if there was any spark, that made you decide to dive headfirst into the world of wine?
So a lot of people have that kind of like light bulb moment with wine. I don't know that I had one single moment. I do remember something, and this is kind of a very odd childhood memory. So I was raised by kind of a single hippie mother in Colorado, and she would kind of drag me everywhere she went, including like going to hang out with her friends. And so I would like sit in the living room while she was hanging with her friends in the kitchen. But at one point, I was sitting there reading a book, because that's what I was usually doing as a kid. And there was this big commotion in the kitchen. Oh my God, that's what I love. It's amazing. Blah, blah. So it turns out one of these people was either a wine connoisseur or a wine importer or something like that. And I remember wandering in the kitchen. I think I was probably, 12 or 13 at this point. I was like, what is going on, people? And they were like, oh my God, this wine tastes like chocolate.
Yeah.
And I was like, come on, wine doesn't taste. And so they gave me a sip, and I was like, sure enough, this wine tastes like chocolate. And that's just kind of like this random little memory for me of in my childhood. And it didn't really like spark any action on my part, later. But like that was a little signal that wine could be something more than just, sort of alcohol, right?
Sure.
I drunk beers at that point with friends, just like all adolescents do, experimenting.
Not under 21.
Not under 21, but these kids experiment.
Yeah.
But alcohol wasn't particularly compelling to me in any way. But I was like, oh, that's like how it tastes grapes, but it tastes like chocolate. So so that lodged in my brain, and then there was that period of exploration in England, as I said. And then I think it was really just kind of like a slow build. It was like the more I drank, the more I was interested, the more I saw that things were different, the better my palate got, and so over time it just became this kind of like snowball rolling down the hill, and it's never stopped.
That's funny. And then the one other question that I always like to ask is, do you have any advice or any guidance or any statements you'd like to make as kind of a closing statement for the podcast today?
Yeah, if I have to, to tell people who are interested in wine, what to do, or sort of like give them some sort of inspiration, I would say drink as widely and as wildly as possible, right? So taste as much as you can. Don't settle for stuff that you like, constantly be exploring new grapes, new regions, new types of wine, because that's the magic of all of this, really. And you're going to make discoveries, and you're going to find stuff you don't like, which is good to know. You're okay. I'm not a Chardonnay person. Well, but have you tried Chablis? Have you tried white Burgundy? Have you tried Italian Chardonnay? Have you tried South African Chardonnay? Have you tried New Zealand Chardonnay? New Zealand is kicking butt when it comes to Chardonnay these days, right? So you got to like explore and try things wildly. And yeah, if you figure out you don't like something, great, cross it off the list, move on to the next thing. But just be curious.
Be curious. I love that. It's a perfect way to wrap it. Well, Alder, I wish I could have you for more time, but as it were.
I got to go drink champagne and eat fried chicken.